And so let's get started. Good afternoon and welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for LeMag Play, this code literacy workshop with exhibition artist Tristan Espinoza, which is inspired by our current exhibit of Tristan's work and index interiors. If you have not already had a chance to do so, I highly encourage you to check out the exhibit as well as our program with Tristan from a couple of weeks ago. And we're going to include links to the chat for both of those, or links to those in the chat, pardon me. My name is Marissa Gonzalez-Kuchek, and I'm an educator here at LeMag. This is our second virtual LeMag Play program, which are usually drop-in family programs that are held under the terrace of the gallery. So of course, we've adjusted the typical format for the virtual space and structured this one to be more interactive. So I really hope that you enjoy it. Before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge some people who this program would not be possible without. So thank you to Tristan for developing this workshop and sharing your practice with us today. I also want to thank the curator of this show, Steve Wong, as well as the whole LeMag team for all of the hard work that they put into this show. And finally, I want to thank all of you for taking time out of your busy schedules and joining us today, especially on this rainy day. Today, you're going to learn more about Tristan's process and the concept of computational poetry. We'll begin by creating our own Dadaist poem inspired by the method of Tristan Tzara, and Espinoza will then show us how that method can translate into a computational form. Before we get started, we just wanted to go through a few housekeeping notes. So if you plan on following along, last reminder, go ahead and gather your materials, which are listed on the screen. The format for today's workshop is going to be a little bit different than the other ones that we've done. For the first 5 to 10 minutes, Tristan will be sharing some context of their work and goals for the workshop today. In that area, we'll be addressing the questions at the end. So if you do have questions after that portion of the presentation, you can either type them into the chat and one of our staff can read it out for you, or you can unmute yourself and share them with Tristan yourself. Also a reminder at this time, if you weren't muted already, please keep your microphone muted during the presentation. After that, we're going to get into the Dadaist poem demo, which is what's going to require the materials, which should take about 10 to 15 minutes. And that's going to lead into the computational poetry instruction. So the computational poetry is a little more, not complicated, but it's we're going to be going through things step by step, and it's a little more instructional. So if you do have any questions while we're going through that and reviewing the code, just feel free to unmute yourself and ask them out loud. And as I mentioned, all of these sections, as well as what we're doing right now, are going to be recorded. After the instructional portion, we'll stop recording and have 10 minutes for reflecting and questions. So as a final reminder, please keep your microphones muted so we can avoid any feedback and technical issues. And if your microphone is inadvertently unmuted, we'll take care of that for you. And I also wanted to make sure that we had the announcement that if you do need closed captioning, that service is being provided today through the link that we put in the chat earlier. So without further ado, let's get started. It's my great pleasure to welcome Tristan Espinoza. Tristan is an artist, programmer, and organizer who lives in Los Angeles. He uses his practice to inquire about displacement and proximity in the context of networked life. By mediating personal archives through computation, he negotiates a sense of place and unsettles the image as a data point. Espinoza also co-organizes Tiny Tech Zines, a tech zine fair that emphasizes care and community in our relationships with technology. Their work has been exhibited internationally and in the US in places such as Archer Beach House, Chicago, Human Resources in Los Angeles, and Espinoza is a current MFA candidate at the University of California, Los Angeles's Design Media Arts program and holds a BFA from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. So with that, take it away, Tristan.
Hi, everybody. It's so nice to be online together. I feel like in a different world, maybe could have been doing this in person and cutting up text in proximity to one another. And that would have been really fun and interesting. But maybe that's something that'll open up later this year. Okay, I mean, I guess it's a good time to get started. Before we dive into things, I would encourage everyone to go and grab whatever materials they need. Also to have a glass of water around. If there's any point during the workshop where you feel like you need to take space and kind of care for your own needs, please feel free to do so. And just wanted to acknowledge that up front. So this workshop is really inspired by a part of my practice that I started to return to, which is working with language in a computational way. And I'll kind of start to open up my project really quickly just to show how that manifested in the work. But basically, I created this online book that I generated from cyanotypes and then fed these images to a computational algorithm that reinterpreted these images and tried to generate text that represents what the algorithm thought it noticed. And so for something like this image, I thought I was looking at a snow-covered slope with a snow-covered forest. And then something like this, a view of the mountain range in the water. And what was really evocative for me was kind of distance between what was being represented and what the computational algorithm was noticing. And also the way that it was reconfiguring my relationship to the labor of the work. And so I did a few other kind of offshoots of this project where I was focusing specifically on the language portion. A quick experiment that just came up for me recently was making this Twitter bot called Uncertain Times. And basically it's a Twitter bot that algorithmically generates these short tweets that are kind of riffing on this experience, especially early in quarantine, where everyone was kind of getting these emails or responses or communications saying, I hope this finds you all in these strange and uncertain times. And for me, I was kind of like frustrated with the coldness of that exchange and trying to work through, I guess, like a funny, absurdist critique of that phenomenon by relegating that labor to a robot. So as we get into the workshop, and that's just kind of some like initial boundaries for the work. And we can kind of talk about some intentions for today. And they're really quick, really short. Write poetry, write code, make evocative decisions with language, and produce a publication. So at the end of this, there is the option to kind of put some of the text that we make together into a Google Doc if that was something that you were interested in. And then maybe in a week or two from now, I'll just typeset it into a book and send it to everyone. And it could be just like an interesting, fun takeaway from this time that we spent together. And maybe we'll like mark this kind of interaction with computation that maybe we haven't had together before. I just want to take a few moments for that to settle in. And then also one thing that I want to emphasize with this workshop is that even though it was communicated as a code literacy, so there are parts of the code writing where we are kind of going to go through some of the, we're going to break down a line of code and what is involved in writing code, but we won't get into the super granular details of writing code. And that's just because there are many systems at play when we are working with computers. And part of the fun is negotiating with some of the kind of emergent experiences of writing code, like typing some words down and then errors coming up, and then kind of dealing with that on the fly. It's also really overwhelming to kind of go through everything all at once. And so I'm trying to find a balance between introducing some computational concepts that'll transfer and scale if there's something if this is something that starts to resonate with you moving forward. So I'm going to move my camera over here and then show everyone kind of the materials for this first part of the workshop. I have a piece of paper that I scanned and printed out from a book called Entering the Blobosphere by Laura Kim. container, just ceramics that my friend had made over here, a pair of scissors. And what we'll end up doing is cutting up this piece of text, putting them in the container, and then as we pull each word out, we'll type them into a Google Doc. And then at the end of that, I think it'd be kind of tragic to talk about poetry, but then not read any of it. So we'll take some time after this activity to kind of go through some of the readings and read aloud some of what we've produced together and then start coding. I hope that makes sense. Let's get into it. So for the Dadaist poem, I'm going to switch to this different tab on my browser. The way to make a Dadaist poem is like really straightforward. You might even call it algorithmic, honestly. And Tristan kind of outlined it in these specific steps, so I'll just read them out to you. Take a newspaper, take a pair of scissors. Choose an article as long as you are planning to make your poem. Cut out the article. Then cut out each of the words that make up this article and put them in a bag. Shake it gently. Then take out the scraps one after the other in the order in which they left the bag. Copy conscientiously. The poem will be like you. And here you are, a writer, infinitely original and endowed with a sensibility that is charming, though beyond the understanding of the vulgar. So there are some like really poetic provocations in here that are interesting, but the instructions for the workshop are actually quite simple. This is my sheet of paper, and I'll just start kind of cutting out each word that's in there, beginning with the first one, which reads introduction. And then I'm going to put it in my container. And then I'm just going to do the same thing for the rest of the words, or as long as I want my poem to be. Does that make sense? I think it'd be okay to take maybe the first or these next 5 to 10 minutes to do that if you haven't already been. And then maybe we can come back after that and see what happens. So just as a reminder, we're going to be cutting out words from your sheet of text. And then you'll copy down each word as you pull them out. There are 2 options for copying. So you can either write them down yourself and kind of store it on your own desktop or something. There's also this option, which I'll share with you right now. So I just put a link to a Google Doc in the Zoom chat. And if you're interested in having your poem be part of this kind of collective zine, Martha, it can be as long as you want it to be. There's no limit or minimum or maximum for your words. It's whatever you're kind of inclined to make. So if you're able to, let me know if you have any issues opening the Google Doc. But essentially what we're going to do is as we cut up this text and we pull them out of our container, we'll just copy each word into the document as they come up. And then at the end, I'll typeset everything into a zine. Okay, so I think this is going to take probably around 5 to 10 minutes. And we can go ahead and just start cutting into our sheet of paper. And collecting all of our different words.
Tristan, I think we had a couple of questions in the chat. One from Linda about, does it have to be an article or just words on the page that we are attracted to? And then I think they're also having an issue opening the Google Doc. Linda, I believe you have to copy the link sometimes from Zoom and then try to put that in a new tab. But maybe Tristan, I see there's other people in there, so it should be an open source, like a public link.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. It's hard to see the chat while you're screen sharing. There are no restrictions, I would say, for how you decide to choose the words. I would say that if you want to be more curated with your output, then you can just choose words that you're attracted to. But it could be fun to, I think part of the fun is seeing what happens when all of these words get collaged together and letting some of that control go. Martha, I noticed that you said you can't open a Google Doc. Let me look into this and see what's going on. I also think that if the Google document isn't working, then feel free to add your results in the, in the chat, and I can just copy them in from there. What else is coming up? Any other troubles or concerns or questions? Feel free to put them in the chat, or if you'd like to unmute yourself, either way is fine.
We just had one participant join us. So for that person, I'm going to copy the link to this Google Doc that you see on your screen. What we're currently doing is making a Dadaist poem, and I'm going to copy the instructions to that as well into the chat for you. But if you have any questions, feel free to ask.
Thanks, Marissa. Should have printed this bigger.
Also, I think we forgot to mention at the beginning, when you start to add your poems into the Google Doc, you can feel free to make them anonymous, create a pseudonym, or include your name, whatever is your preference.
Yep. Thank you for adding that. Okay, I'm almost done cutting up my text, and then I'm going to be adding my poem into the document in just a second. And just a quick time check. We're at 1:29. I think it would be fine to spend 5 more minutes adding our words into the Google Doc or chat.
We just had one more participant join us. So I'm going to, what we're doing right now is creating our Dadaist poems. I'm going to copy the link to the Google Doc that you see being populated by participants' poems. And Tristan will be producing a zine that will include these poems. So if you want to be included in that, put your poem in the Google Doc, but it's not required. And I just put that link in the chat. You'll see the instructions are at the beginning of that Google Doc. Linda, I just want to confirm, would you like us to add what you typed in the chat into the doc? And do you want to sign it or keep it anonymous?
There are no right ways to do this, Robin. That too.
And I'm going to repeat it again just because I think one more person joined us just now. So I'm going to copy for the person that just joined us. We're just finishing up the Dada poem, and we're copying, for those of us that want to, our poem into the shared Google Doc that you see on the screen. Tristan, after the workshop, is going to take all of those poems and put them into a document, like a zine, and that'll be sent out to everyone. So by putting your poem there, you do consent to being included in that zine. And you can put it there anonymously, you can create a pseudonym, or you can sign it, whatever you prefer.
Okay. I'm going to end my poem where it is. If you're still typing or just joining, feel free to continue finishing out your poem until it gets to a point where it feels satisfying. But kind of just start preparing to transition. So my intention was to maybe read some of these poems now, but I think it would be nice to wait a little bit. Or I don't know. Marissa, what do you think?
I think if anyone wants to start reading them, we can go ahead while others are finishing up inputting their poems. I'm just adding Linda's into the document right now. But if anyone wants to volunteer to read them aloud, and also they could read their own or they could read someone else's.
Mhm.
Go ahead and choose one to read aloud. Entering phenomenological, the pronounced blobosphere, irresistible. Realize presence everywhere mysterious. Introduction everything, blob, blob, blob. Simply more mystique. Experience a felt. Enigmatic humble attending force. Inexplicable further perception's beauty. Probe assuming your.
That's so funny. I'll read this third one maybe. Eyes. Gantlet recruits India's women. Vaccine rallies orders to lead shield face. Catch blue issues, elders, vaccine, far right. Lines, Biden, effort front, climate memes, mass, a bold join of tractor on. I actually really like that last line. It felt really lyrical. I'm going to open up maybe just a few more minutes in case, or like just one more minute in case someone is inclined to read a statement or sorry, not a statement, a sentence from one of these or something. But if not, I think it would be a good time to go into the computational part of this workshop. So I'm going to switch to a different tab. If anyone has issues seeing this, just let me know. So where are we? What are we doing here? This is a Google Colab notebook. And it's not really something that Google has like made available or something that's immediately visible if you have like a Gmail or something. Maybe you use Google Docs or Google Slides or whatever. They also put out this service on their platform where you can write code in the browser and then you can share it with people as if it were a Google Doc. And so this is essentially a notebook in the browser where you can click on lines of code that I've already pre-written, and then it runs them for you. And the way that it does that is that it actually connects to a, I'm gonna try something a little different actually. So when you're on this, like when you open up this in your browser, over here it'll say connect to a runtime or something. You click on that, and then it'll connect you to a computer that Google owns. And that's where it starts to run the code. And so it's not actually happening on your computer. And we're going to be using this in a specific way. So I kind of just want to go through this introductory text. This Google Notebook is using the Python programming language. And we're using Colab because it's a really simple way of kind of setting up your own environment and to code right away without having to download a bunch of this other stuff that can make things complicated and intimidating. You don't need to know any code. You don't need a Google account to look at, to open this up in your browser. If you do want to run some of the code, you'll have to log in to your Google. So that's the only kind of limitation that you have. And then just a few kind of observations. This part of my practice I'm really deriving from an artist, Alison Parrish, who is doing a lot of work kind of in this discipline and with this process and producing a lot of beautiful kind of evocative text by working with them computationally. The stuff here will transfer and scale. So if you find yourself kind of wanting to do more of this, like working with language computationally, then you'll see that some of these concepts are reappearing again. Python is great. We're using it here in this notebook because there's a lot of resources online for learning how to use Python. There's also a big community for Python. And that's really essential because coding is a collaborative activity. It's kind of collectively done, and it's really easy to kind of post questions online and kind of get responses to help work through your code and troubleshoot some ideas that you have. And then the last thing, which kind of feels more like a disclaimer, I really kind of am repulsed by Google, but again, this makes it really easy to write and share code with everybody in a way that makes things less intimidating. Like otherwise you would have to download all of this specific software to kind of set up your personal laptop or environment to start coding. With this, I can just type code into the browser and then run it right away. So those are kind of some of the things that we should get out of the way first. And then one last thing is that I really hope that nobody feels pressure to understand all of these concepts right away. The point here is to play with code and see what's possible and not have immediate mastery over everything. So with that being said, let's kind of go into this. The easiest line of code is really just like one line of text. And this is what it says. It says print, an opening parentheses, quotation marks, what I'm writing to you goes on, and I am bewitched. And then in a closing set of quotation marks, and then a right parentheses. The way to run code in this notebook is to just click on the play button, and then it displays here what happens. This line of code has a few different things going on. I'm actually going to fix this typo because it says 3, but there are 4 bullet points. So there are 4 parts to this line of code, right? This word, print, which is kind of telling the computer, this is what I want to do. There's a pair of parentheses inside of which there is some text that's being displayed. And you kind of really need all of these components at once in order to execute this line of code. If some of the stuff isn't there, you start to run into errors. So here, for example, this is the exact same line, except print is spelled wrong. Specifically, it's kind of missing a T. And so I get this error. When you get an error, the line of code doesn't run most of the time. And then it starts to display what the error is. There are a few more common errors that I put into this notebook for you. And this one doesn't actually have an error come up, but you can see that it's also not doing anything. So if certain things aren't in place, it could lead to some unexpected behaviors. We don't really need to dive into all of these errors, what they are, or what they mean. But I think it's worth noting them because they do come up as you're programming, and kind of part of the enjoyment and certainly the difficulty of coding is encountering these errors and kind of seeing what a possible response will be. These are really easy to fix, right? So if I just add a T right here, so print isn't misspelled anymore, then it runs properly. And this one is missing a parentheses on the right. And it looks like this one isn't in quotation marks. So those are all like really, really easy fixes for this. And this one just doesn't have anything in it. But if I added some text, then it works just fine. I'm going to undo some of these. And so I wanted to focus on like this specific command that we're looking at, which is called print. Print is a piece of code that you can use to display the text that's in parentheses. And so if you click the play button and your line of code is print, and then inside is bewitched, then it displays bewitched there. You can use it to print out words. Numbers are also a possibility. And then you can combine some text also. So here it's separated into what I'm writing to you goes on plus and I am bewitched. And this is the same thing, but I'm just adding a number. And this is actually kind of weird because there's no space here. So I'll probably just fix that by adding a space right there. I want to share this Google Doc with everyone so that you have an opportunity to go in and kind of write your own code. I'm going to see.
And just a reminder, I think we want everyone to make a copy of the Google Doc, right?
Yeah.
Once they get into it? Okay.
Yeah, thanks for that. And the way to do that is the same with any other kind of Google file, which is you go up to File, then click Save a Copy in Drive. And what that'll end up doing is I actually have certain security. Okay. And then what that'll end up doing is saving a copy of this notebook into your Google Drive. And this is really important because you want to be working on your own copy of this document. You don't want to share, or you don't want to be working on something that everyone else is working on at the same time. So that's a really easy way to get the to have like to introduce errors into everything. So I'm going to add this into the chat. And if you're interested in following along or running the code, then you can go ahead and open that document. Again, make sure to save a copy to your drive and not work on the document directly. And then you may also get a kind of a disclaimer saying that something, this notebook wasn't authored by Google or whatever. Are you sure you want to do this? And you can go ahead and click agree to that because there's nothing malicious happening in the document or with the code. We're just making poems. I want to pause for a little bit before I go on and see if any questions have surfaced. What's coming up for everyone, if there are any thoughts or concerns. And you can put them in the chat or unmute yourself. Okay, if not, I wanted to introduce this next concept in programming. It's called variables. So variables are essentially like containers, right? So if you say you type in a word in the code, and then it acts kind of like this piece of ceramic where you can put something in it, and then the computer kind of understands what it's looking at. You like agree that this container means this certain thing. How this manifests in the code is that you basically just decide on a name for your variable. So in this case, I'm going to say, here's a container. I'm going to call it subject. And then after that, you add an equal sign. And then the value that you want the variable to contain. In this cell, I have introduced two different variables, one called subject and one called predicate. So just dividing up the sentence into parts of speech. And then what ends up happening is after you press the play button, the computer remembers that subject means I and predicate means want to paint a rose. And what ends up happening is actually really powerful because then you can write more lines of code where you use those variables in place of typing in like the actual text itself. So here, instead of saying print I, I'm saying print subject. And then you can see that I is still printed out here next to the cell. And that's because we've set these two equal to each other. Once you have these variables, you can add them together. So if I say subject plus predicate, then it'll add I with want to paint a rose and then prints that out for you. Just like some quick practices for variables. Generally, you want to make sure that they're short and descriptive, and that's just for legibility, so that you, like when you look at this code again, you understand what's going on, or like someone else knows what's happening. It can be hard to figure out kind of what you were thinking about after the fact if you're coming back to this like, I don't know, 2 years later or something, and suddenly decide you want to program. You can name your variables anything you want. So this is just me kind of mashing on a keyboard, you know, instead of subject equals I, honest or whatever. And this works, it's fine, the computer understands that. But again, when you come back to this, or if you're looking over the code right now, it's really hard to tell what you're doing. So generally you kind of want to stick to something like that. Where this concept starts to get really powerful is if you think about variables as a container, you can hold more than one possibility inside of a variable. So here I'm introducing a new variable. I'm calling it subjects. And then I'm saying that subjects can be either I, they, or we. And what this does is it turns it into a list. So if I use the print command again and print subjects, then it'll print out all three of our options. The procedure for this is really easy. You basically just have all of your values in quotation marks, and then you add a comma between all of them, except for the last one. And then you add an opening and closing bracket. And just make sure that those are there, because if not, then errors again are introduced. Here's a new thing, import random. The import statement is something that you can do with code where it brings in other chunks of code that you could use in your program. And this is really great because some people have already written lines of code that do what you want to do, and so you don't have to write that yourself. So we're going to use a function from this line of code that we brought in, or like another command called choice. And this lets it choose one option from the three that we specified. So if I say random.choice and then put our list, our variable in here, and click play, every time a different option shows up, or most of the time anyway. And this is really great when you want to just like make sentences really, really quickly, because then you can just press play and then it just randomly chooses one of the words that you specified. The syntax for this is just a little bit different. There's, you can't say something just like print subjects like this. If you do that, an error comes up, and it's because the computer doesn't know, like you haven't agreed that this is something that you and the computer can do together pretty much. It only knows about choice if you relate it back to the module that we put in, or to the chunk of code called random. And the way of doing it that is just by adding the dot after the name of a chunk of code that you brought in. So instead of print choice.subjects, we say print random.choice.subjects. These next few cells start to kind of demonstrate how convenient that can make things. So I have a different sentence now where I'm saying, or we're going to be working with the sentence from before where I want to paint a rose, but let's replace I with I, there, we, and then let's also replace a rose with lily or hibiscus. So I've set up another variable. I'm going to change this to flowers, actually, because that seems more descriptive. And then in the next cell, you can click this, and then it'll automatically generate these sentences for you. We want to paint hibiscus. We want to paint a lily. They want to paint a lily. So it really just quickly replaces these words in your sentence. And we can make this more and more complicated. I've changed the verb. I'm going to add a list of verbs to choose from. So instead of eat, maybe it's become a rose. We want to become a rose. We want to paint a lily. They want to paint a lily. They want to become a rose. So it's just a really quick way of making sentences and writing words together. And then just to recap, we use the print function to put text in it and display that onto the screen. Variables are placeholders. When you type them into your program, they get replaced with the value that you gave them. You can make variables have multiple values. So it's really a container that has different possibilities. There's a lot of pre-written code already that you can bring in using imports. And the specific one we use is called random. So if you bring random in, then you can perform random calculations. I'm going to open up this next section called Dada generator and just show you quickly what we're going to work towards. So there's a lot of stuff here that I haven't introduced yet, but let's kind of go through what the important bits are. So here's my text. This is my paragraph. It's an excerpt from Clarice Lispector's Agua Viva. And this is kind of what I want to make into a Dada poem, right? So what's happening here is I define, or like I tell the computer, this is the text that I want to work with. This is my paragraph. And like in the earlier part of the workshop, I separate each word in that paragraph and put it into a list. I shuffle the words around, and then I join them back together. So clicking on this will produce a different poem each time. Space, every has already gone, new tell of gone. They already in hold also, so you too is. That's time, sees thing, passing it of in, and that gone too, because already the I. So it's kind of nonsensical, but also entertaining at the same time. And that's like a really enjoyable quality of this. Let's go back up and really break that down and what was going on. So before we were using the same kind of chunk of code, let's bring that in again, import random. Here is the text that we're going to use called paragraph. You may want that to be a little bit more legible. In this case, you can kind of do something like this, where before and after your text, you just put 3 quotation marks. And that just signals to the computer that you're doing this kind of line of text where you've clicked return at the end of the line or something. So it takes into account those different formatting issues. Now that I've done that, I'm just going to check to see that this is the text that I want to work with by printing the variable out. And now we can turn this whole thing into a list of words that we can play with. So before we kind of set up different lists for words that we wanted to replace, in this case, we're just going to jumble the entire thing up. And we do that with this line of code right here called paragraph.split. And it's essentially, you take your variable that you've put your text in, and then you say split, and that separates all of the words in your variable and makes a list out of it. This is what it looks like. So when I print this new variable out, print words, let me tell you, I'm trying to seize the 4th dimension. So this is actually the text that we're working with, and it prints it out in order. But what we want to do is randomize that. So these next 2 lines of code will do that. We're using a different command from the random library called shuffle. And the way to use it is you just pass in your list of words, and then it just mixes them automatically. So now you can see that all of the words are in a different order now. Breathe, of, the, space, possess. And you can keep doing this until it feels like something you want to make into a Dadaist poem. I'm going to stop here because I like that. This next cell puts them together with a different function called join. And then it attaches them together based on this part right here. So I've kind of said, put all of these words together with a white space between them. You can change that into whatever character you want. So here, instead of a white space, I'm putting a hashtag. And then it just puts a hashtag between words. I'm going to keep it with the white space between things. This next part is just formatting your text so that it looks nice. we don't need to know the nitty gritty of what these lines of code do. But basically what's happening is we're just bringing in a convenient set of tools, and then we can use some of the tools from the code that we brought in order to format it so it looks nicely. So what this does is it creates a paragraph where each line of the paragraph is no more than 40 characters long. And you can change this number to see kind of visually what you might want to be more interested in. So changing it to 10 like produces this like really terse vertical format. I'm going to keep it at 40. In this last cell, I just put all of the code together. So you don't have to go back and kind of run each cell individually. But at the end, you can kind of just click this single line or this play button, replace the text in here with whatever you want to work with. And then it automatically makes that for you. And that's where we've gotten to. So now you can kind of just click on this. If you open up this notebook in your browser, replace any of this text here with whatever writing you want to work with. And then it does what we were doing kind of manually with cutting the words out and pulling them out one by one. Now you're kind of doing it with code. I want to show something really optional before we close out. But if you ever wanted to kind of work with a like a text file or something, maybe you've written stuff already, or you want to pull a book down that you have, there's ways of doing that with code. So I'm actually downloading a book from Project Gutenberg, and it's a website that archives all kinds of books that are in the public domain or like have expired copyrights. All of these are free to work with. And I'll just click on these cells so that you can kind of see what's going on. In here, we download the book. This cell reads it into our program. So now the computer knows and remembers the text. We're going to print out the first 500 words. And so that's what shows up. If I go to the actual file, you can see that that maps pretty, yeah, 1-to-1. So that's the first 500 words. That's all kind of like errata and metadata and licensing. It's not actually the narrative. So maybe we'll kind of choose a different chunk of the text to use. That's what this next line of code does. Let's see what came out. Yeah, that seems workable. And then we'll just repeat the process that we had earlier where we take this chunk of text that we have that's in a variable, make a list out of it. Let's see what we got in that list. The coming with Carsa there. And then we'll just randomize the order and then print it out again. So there are a few different possibilities. So now this is an extension of before where now we have another Dada poem generator, but it's using 100 words from a sci-fi novel that I downloaded. And you can replace the file with whatever, anything that you've downloaded or is like already on your laptop or computer. The way to do that is to just upload it into this column on the left. And then you would replace the line of code here with the name of your file. And then I put all of this code together at the end so that you can run everything without having to go through each line of the document. So clicking here will download a text. And this will just shuffle them and put them back into a random order for you. Okay, that was weird and strange to kind of talk through over Zoom. Uh, One last thing before we kind of close out is that I have this next section where anyone who's interested in kind of continuing to develop this creative relationship with code or thinking about software as like a creative material, there's a lot of resources online. And I've listed some of them here that are kind of, uh, some of it is beginner friendly, other parts are more, it's good to have familiarity with code or have someone who knows code so that they can guide you through it. And all of that is here. There's some like really easy text generation stuff. Corpora is really fun. It's just a list of words that you can pull in. So um, you can download these files and then use them in your text generation. Um, there's a machine learning thing in here too. So if you want to train a computer on a set of language or like a set of words, then you can do that with this link, which is another Colab notebook. This one's a little bit more advanced and some errors sometimes come up. It would be good to have someone there to guide you. Another library, I highly recommend looking into processing in P5.js. Both of those platforms they're essentially self-contained starter languages. And what you'll end up noticing is that as you kind of learn to go through some of these tutorials for writing code on these platforms is that you can quickly generate these like online kind of applications super quickly. They also have a really wonderful emphasis on community and inclusivity, kind of spanning race, gender, ability, age, and just like moving this knowledge outside of the institution so that anyone who's kind of interested in coding, whether or not you're a student, an artist, computer science major, person at home who wants to learn things, they're really inviting about that. Okay, that sounds good. I'm going to stop sharing.
And I'm going to stop the recording at this time. So if anyone